before we continue, I have an announcement." She said it like she was ordering wine, like the room wasn't full of men in suits and women in power skirts, half of whom had known us since the first pitch deck. My hands were still on the table, hovering over the clicker for the next slide. I thought maybe she'd announce an acquisition, a new hire, something to reinforce our growth narrative, but instead she pulled out a manila envelope with the same calm efficiency she used when firing people. Not a flicker of hesitation. "I'm filing for divorce, effective immediately." Then she paused, made eye contact with each person around the boardroom table, lingering on me last. "I don't want to share the company with a nobody." She smiled, the kind of smile that tells you she's rehearsed the line, the kind that's meant to land like a grenade. There was a beat of silence, and then someone, I think it was the external advisor from Boston, chuckled awkwardly. The rest followed with the same half-laugh people use when they're not sure if it's a joke. No one looked at me directly, not even Mara. She just slid the envelope toward the chair next to her, folded her hands, and waited. I clicked the remote. The next slide appeared, Q2 cost to revenue alignment. "As projected," I said, voice level. "We're holding a 6.2% margin advantage over last year's curve." Nobody interrupted. Nobody said a word. The meeting continued, or at least the motions did. By the way, if you've made it this far, take a second to like and subscribe. Most people never do, and it really helps the team bring you more of these stories. After the meeting, I walked straight to my office and closed the door. I didn't text her, didn't ask why. I didn't need to. It had been coming. I just hadn't expected it to be weaponized like this. She always did have a flair for the dramatic, the kind that could be disguised as strategy. At home that night, everything was still in place. 2 wine glasses on the rack. Her shoes by the door, her favorite mug by the sink. I half expected to find her packing or sulking, maybe even trying to talk. But she was in the living room, curled up with her laptop like any other night, as if nothing had happened. She looked up once when I came in. "Cleaner this way. No drama. Just sign." That's all she said. I didn't answer. I went to the bedroom, shut the door, and laid on the bed with my arms at my sides, staring at the ceiling until the light coming through the blinds changed color. She slept in the guest room. I heard the door click around midnight. The next morning I made coffee and sat on the back steps. The air was cool, dew still on the grass. I stared at the hedge I'd trimmed the weekend before, thinking about how much silence a marriage can accumulate before it fractures. I wasn't even angry. That was the strangest part. It was like something inside me had gone still. I just kept thinking, if this is how she wanted it, fine, but she'd underestimated one thing. I'm not a nobody. I helped build this company from a half-funded dream into a multi-tiered operation with 76 employees and a client retention rate most firms would envy. And while Mara had the title, the suits, the charm, I had the architecture, the bones, the legal blueprints most of them had never read. At lunch, I canceled my afternoon meetings. I needed time, not to grieve, but to remember. Back at my desk, I logged into the internal portal, dug through archived files. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for yet, but I knew something had been overlooked. Something quiet, unsexy, something legal. At 5:37 p.m., I found it 7 years ago. Clause 12C, written into our co-founder's charter back when we were working out of a shared workspace with mismatched chairs and a coffee machine that shook when it brewed. I read it twice, then printed it. Upon attempted transfer of spousal equity without board review, co-founder may petition to invoke freeze. She must have forgotten, or assumed I had, but I remembered every line of that early document because I wrote them, while she was still juggling consulting gigs and thinking this company was a risk too big to back. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. The humiliation of the morning was gone, replaced with something colder, cleaner. She'd tried to erase me, so I would remind her who had written the foundation. I didn't speak for the rest of that day. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be used, misquoted, or filed away in some carefully crafted narrative. Everyone had seen what happened. A few board members tried to check in afterward. Soft voices, nervous half smiles. But I brushed them off, just nodded, kept walking. Silence does something most people can't handle. It makes them fill in the blanks. By mid-afternoon, the whispers had already started. I wasn't taking it well, apparently, or maybe I was too calm. Either way, the performance had begun, hers and theirs, and I was no longer participating. At home, she kept things absurdly normal. She didn't avoid me, didn't gloat, just moved through the space like we were sharing a hotel suite. She made tea, changed into leggings and a hoodie, watched the same reality show she always did, even asked if I wanted takeout. I said no. "It's cleaner this way," she said that night, setting down her mug with careful hands. "No drama, just sign when you're ready." Then she took a blanket and went to the guest room, like this was some temporary logistics shift, like we were moving furniture, not dissolving a life. I stood at the hallway mirror for a long time after she closed the door. My reflection looked back at me like a stranger in my own house. Eyes flat, skin pale under the hallway light. There was no anger, not yet. Just a kind of deep internal quiet, like something had sunk to the bottom of me and landed without a splash. The next few days blurred together. She kept routines intact, texted me company updates, forwarded investor questions, even CC'd me on scheduling notes like we were just colleagues now. But her voice changed when she spoke on the phone with Richard, the founder. The tone softened, grew conspiratorial. I'd walk past the office and hear her laugh, too high, too performative. A laugh she used to save for closing deals. Now it was for him. Once I heard her say, "He's too cautious. He doesn't understand scale." A pause, then laughter again, that same brittle edge. She didn't know I was standing outside the door. I didn't knock, didn't react. That night, we crossed paths in the kitchen. She reached for a bottle of wine. I reached for the fridge. She smiled, tight-lipped. "Long day?" "Just full," I said, not looking at her. She opened her iPad on the counter while pouring the wine, left it unlocked. Notifications buzzed, calendar alerts, Slack, a flight confirmation, and then one message. It lit the screen like a trap. "He doesn't get it. He never did." No name, just the initial R. I didn't flinch, just memorized it. Then, when she stepped away to take a call, I took the iPad to my study and mirrored the data. It took 4 minutes to forward the message thread to my secure server, another 10 to pull a full backup of her device and store it on an encrypted external drive. She didn't notice. When she returned, I handed the iPad back without comment. She thanked me without question. And that was the moment I knew I was no longer inside the story she was telling. I was the obstacle, the problem to be removed, rewritten, or ignored. But she hadn't accounted for one thing. You can't erase someone who built the blueprints. The next morning I drove to the office early, sat in the parking lot with the windows down and the dossier I'd started spread out across the passenger seat. I wasn't gathering dirt. I was documenting a pattern, internal transfers, private meetings labeled as off-site wellness, email phrasing that had shifted over the last 6 months, we becoming I, and then R and I, a slow drift, not just emotional but structural. She was already re-architecting the narrative before the announcement, before the envelope. She thought I hadn't seen it because I hadn't reacted, but the silence wasn't apathy. It was calibration. At night, I started locking my office, password protecting my devices, deactivating her biometric access to shared cloud drives. I wasn't hiding, I was retreating behind the walls I had built. One morning, I caught her staring at me as I sipped coffee. No words, just that look, the one people give when they think they've won but haven't quite confirmed it yet. I let her have it, because confirmation has weight, and I wanted every ounce of it pressing down when the reversal came. 2 days passed without a single word about the boardroom ambush. She moved through the house like we were friendly coworkers sharing a short-term lease. No tension, no apologies, no lingering glances, just a polite distance, the kind that takes more effort than honesty ever would. Then Thursday night, she came home carrying a bottle of Napa Red and 2 glasses. The label was one of my favorites. Small detail, but not an accident. "Let's be civil," she said, setting them down on the table. "For appearances." I looked up from the quarterly breakdown I was reviewing. She was wearing the cardigan she always pulled out when she wanted to soften a moment. I nodded. "Smart." She poured, sat, crossed her legs with practiced ease. "Maybe we can sort the assets quietly. No need to drag things through court." I met her eyes. Of course. We toasted. clinked glasses like business partners negotiating a gentle merger. For the rest of the evening, we stayed in that performance. She talked about upcoming investor meetings. I asked about logistics. She floated the idea of separate press statements when the time came, just to avoid speculation. I agreed, smiled at the right moments, played along like the good loser she wanted, but at midnight, when she'd gone to bed, back to the guest room, back to her side of this staged civility, I powered up my laptop in the study and logged into our board portal. I wasn't looking for ammo, I was looking for leverage, and not the kind built on whispers or feelings, the kind with dates, clauses, and signatures, the kind no one could ignore once it was read aloud. I opened the original co-founder charter, the version no one had touched in years. We'd written it late one night at the old office, running on energy drinks and ambition. She'd skimmed it back then, trusting me to handle the boring legal framework while she focused on the money. And that was her first mistake, because nestled between stock dilution protections and founder rights was Clause 12C. I read it once, then again, slowly. Upon attempted transfer of spousal equity without board review, co-founder may petition to invoke freeze. Not must, may, it was a choice. And co-founder meant me. Not her, not Richard, me. I'd written that clause after seeing a mid-stage startup implode when a co-founder's divorce dragged half the company into court. Mara had rolled her eyes at the time, said it was overkill, but she'd signed it, and now she'd forgotten it existed. I bookmarked the clause, exported a PDF, then opened our shared cap table and pulled every transaction from the last 9 months. Flagged 2 entries where her equity had shifted into a private shell, discreet, tidy, and just opaque enough to slip past scrutiny, but not past me. Next, I downloaded internal memos with her signature, especially the ones co-signed by Richard. The language was vague, but a pattern emerged. Meetings off calendar, shifts and budget allocations, authorizations without my countersign. It wasn't just emotional betrayal, it was fiduciary exposure, and she knew it or thought she did. I sat back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. The house was silent. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a breath trying to leave quietly. The wine glasses were still on the table downstairs, her empty bottle, my half-full one. Civility was a useful mask, but beneath it the terrain had already shifted. She believed the company was hers to reshape, that I'd go quietly, that she could surgically remove me without setting off alarms. But the architecture of this company had my fingerprints on every beam, and now I had the blueprint in hand. The next morning, I went about the day like normal, took my coffee outside, read the news, answered emails. She walked past on her way to a call, paused. "You seem okay." "I am," I said without looking up. "Thanks for the wine." She hesitated, like she wasn't sure if I meant it, then kept walking. She didn't know yet, didn't see it coming. But the clause was real, and I wasn't just preparing to use it. I was building the timing, the frame, the silence, because when the moment came, it wouldn't be personal. It would be procedural. The house was quiet, in the way that only guilt can make it. Mara was meeting investors, or so she said. Every morning she left early in tailored blazers and heels that clicked with purpose across the hardwood floors. She barely looked at me anymore, which was fine. I wasn't interested in her eyes. I was interested in what she was hiding behind them. She had no idea what I was building. While she took meetings with men who thought charm was a substitute for governance, I sat in the study with the blinds half closed and the printer humming like a patient machine of war. I wasn't scavenging. I wasn't guessing. I was constructing a complete narrative, piece by piece, until the full shape of the betrayal revealed itself like a blueprint drawn in ink that only appears under heat. It started with the email logs. I had back-end access to the internal relay. Most board-level communication went through encrypted channels, but she wasn't always careful. She used the same password on multiple devices. I'd mirrored her iPad once, that was all it took. The first string was innocent. Calendar notes, travel confirmations, finance updates. But woven in between were one-liners that made my stomach go still. "Don't loop him in yet. Can't share until the split's official. Better if he's not in the room." She never named me, but I didn't need names. I recognized the spaces where I used to belong. Next, I pulled the routing maps, funding activity between our joint accounts, and a set of LLCs tied to Richard's family trust. Nothing illegal on the surface, but the timing lined up with my exclusion from key capital rounds. She was reallocating position, diluting my access before I even realized it. Then came the board transcripts. She thought I didn't listen during meetings, that I was too ops-focused, too buried in the logistics to catch the way she framed the narrative, but the transcripts remembered everything. One entry from last fall stopped me cold, mid-meeting. Mara had said, in front of the entire board, he's a solid operator, but not a visionary. That's why R&I are stepping up. Not we, not the team, R&I. It wasn't just a change in tone. It was a strategic rewrite of history. I printed it, highlighted it. Then I moved to the travel records. It took some digging, but I found the overlaps. She and Richard had vacationed separately 3 times in the last 9 months, according to her calendar. But flight logs told a different story. Same destinations, same hotels. One even used her corporate card, sloppy or arrogant. I compiled everything chronologically, cross-referenced, color-coded. By the time the sun rose on Sunday morning, I had a dossier as thick as a small novel, bound with steel coils, tabs marked for each category: communications, financial movement, public statements, travel. And at the front, a printed cover with bold black text: Equity Integrity, Dossier. I ran my fingers over the letters, not with pride, but with a quiet sort of finality. This wasn't about revenge, it was about record, the kind that doesn't beg or argue, it presents. I didn't plan to raise my voice, I didn't need to. I had built something stronger than a rebuttal. I had a timeline. And in the world Mara thought she controlled, timelines are truth. She came home Sunday evening, flushed from whatever echo chamber she'd spent the day in. She hummed as she set her bag down, like things were going her way. I didn't say a word, just nodded from my seat at the kitchen island, hands folded over a closed laptop. She asked if I'd had dinner. I did, I said. Hope your meeting went well? It did, she smiled. Very well. I watched her pour herself a drink. She never noticed the printer tray still warm under the cabinet light. That night I slid the dossier into a black shoulder bag, locked it with a clasp, set it by the door like an umbrella, casual, ready. The next morning, she left early again, this time in her navy pantsuit, the one she wears when she's sure the room will side with her. I waited until the house was completely silent, then I opened my laptop one last time and added a single post-it note to the front of the file. In my handwriting, let's go over the facts, because facts, real ones, don't flinch under pressure, and this wasn't a folder anymore, it was evidence waiting for the right room. The air in the boardroom was colder than usual, like someone had turned up the AC to freeze whatever warmth was left between us. It was 9:02 a.m. Monday morning. The room had filled quickly, every chair occupied, every executive present, eyes alert but uncertain, the kind of attendance you only get when something's burning. Mara had called the meeting late Sunday night. Emergency session to address leadership stability, the subject line read. Most of them probably assumed I'd be stepping down, or at least agreeing to some kind of quiet exit. Her timing was calculated, early enough to control the tone, close enough to the weekend to avoid leaks. She sat at the head of the table, perfectly composed. Richard was to her right, fingers steepled like a smug advisor who thought his proximity made him essential. He nodded to a few board members as they trickled in. One returned the nod. The others glanced between Mara and the empty seat at the far end of the table. Mine. I didn't sit. I walked in exactly 1 minute late, holding the black bag by its worn leather handle, the weight of the dossier inside like a counterbalance to my own pulse. Mara's expression shifted just slightly. Not surprise, just adjustment. She was already preparing her next move. Richard leaned back in his chair, scanning me like I was a PR problem he hadn't finished drafting a memo about. I stopped beside my usual seat, didn't take it. Before we proceed, I said, voice steady, measured, I'd like to confirm something for the record. Chair shifted, a throat cleared. One board member, Scott, looked up from his notepad. No one spoke. Mara straightened in her seat. This isn't... I set the black folder on the table in front of me. Let the sound of it landing interrupt her. This is, I said. A few people looked at her, then at the folder. I didn't open it yet, just rested my hand on top. Before we talk about restructuring leadership, I continued, I'd like to make sure we're all aligned on what's actually been happening here, financially, legally, and structurally. The chairman, Lorna, glanced between us. Are we talking about internal compliance? We're talking about internal integrity, I replied. But if you prefer specifics, yes, compliance is one of them. Mara let out a breath like she was trying to stay polite. This is a private matter. No, I said, meeting her eyes. This is a corporate matter with personal fingerprints. And before this board makes any leadership decisions, they deserve context. Richard leaned forward slightly. You're overstepping, and you know it. I turned to him slowly. Richard, it's good to finally hear you speak without using her phone. That landed harder than I expected. One of the board members coughed to cover a smirk. Another adjusted his glasses, suddenly very interested in the printout in front of him. Mara's lips tightened. She was losing the tempo, and she knew it. I'd like to distribute some documents, I said, opening the folder and pulling out the first set of index packets. They include communication logs, fund movement summaries, and board meeting transcripts, all highlighting the evolution of language and decision-making that's taken place over the past 9 months. I passed them down the table. No one refused. Each person took their copy, flipping pages slowly, eyes narrowing as they scanned highlights, notes, dates. Nobody interrupted, not yet. At the bottom of each packet was the quote, her quote. He's a solid operator, but not a visionary. That's why R&I are stepping up. Spoken in this very room, recorded, transcribed. The room shifted, not loud, just enough to feel. Lorna cleared her throat. Mara, is this accurate? Mara's voice was tight. That was taken out of context. It's part of a consistent pattern, I said, and it goes beyond words. I slid the next section forward. These are fund routing diagrams showing equity transfers initiated by Mara into private LLCs associated with Richard's holdings, some of them tied directly to investment accounts created during our joint incorporation window. Richard shook his head. This is speculative. No, I said, tapping the top corner of the document. It's timestamped, verified through internal audit tools you both signed off on during the last compliance renewal. The silence was heavier now, tense, unblinking. And finally, I said, the foundational document, Clause 12C. I slid a single laminated sheet to the center of the table, authored during our original charter, signed by all co-founders. It outlines the process by which a co-founder may petition for an equity freeze in the event of a conflict involving spousal shares and undisclosed board relationships. The line was there, bold, undeniable. Mara stared at it like it was written in another language. I wrote this clause, I said softly, before this company had funding, before any of you had joined, before she believed in it. No one spoke, no one moved. This isn't an ambush, I said, stepping back from the table. It's a restoration of balance, of facts, of the company's original intent. I finally sat down. Lorna looked around the table, then back at Mara, whose face had frozen into something unreadable. We'll need to take a moment, Lorna said. The boardroom didn't explode. It shifted, and the narrative shifted with it. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make every shuffle of paper feel like thunder. Every flick of a page, another drumbeat toward collapse. Mara sat stiff beside Richard, her hand clenched around a pen she hadn't written a single note with. He looked composed, until I opened the folder again. No dramatics, no speeches, just the click of the metal clasp as I unfolded the laminated page. Clause 12C, I said, letting my voice fill the room. Freeze of spousal equity upon conflict of interest with board member. Someone on the far side of the table cleared their throat. A chair creaked. But I kept my eyes on Mara, who blinked slowly, as if stalling would rewrite the clause midair. Then I turned the page. Exhibit A, I said, laying down a full-color map of financial transfers between two shell accounts, both tied to an investment trust managed by Richard's firm, her initials, his initials, dates, amounts, routing identifiers. This transaction occurred 4 weeks after Mara and Richard were both warned about bypassing board protocol for equity reallocation. The company's lead legal counsel, Jared, sat forward, glasses slipping slightly down his nose. "Is this authenticated?" I nodded. "By our internal audit trail, with timestamps and metadata intact. I've included a digital backup, password protected, and mirrored to the compliance vault." He didn't speak, just reached for the packet and started flipping. Mara leaned forward then, her voice tight. "This is personal." "No," I said before she could gain momentum. "This is structural." I pushed a second folder across the table toward Jared. "This is a formal motion to invoke Clause 12C, filed in accordance with the co-founder's charter. All evidentiary support included." He opened it, scanned the front page, stopped at my signature. "Effective immediately," I continued. "Her equity is to be suspended pending full review by the board and legal advisory panel." Richard stood halfway up from his chair. "You can't be serious." But Jared raised a hand, still reading. "He can. The clause holds." I turned slightly, addressing the room now. "This is not a punishment. This is preservation. The company's founding structure cannot be compromised for personal leverage or undisclosed partnerships, especially not when those partnerships directly impact capital positioning." Mara's mouth opened, but the words didn't come. Her silence wasn't from shame. It was from calculation. She was running the numbers. How long would this freeze last? Would she be able to counter it before it caused damage? Who in the room still leaned toward her? Who was already reconsidering? I gave her nothing because she had already taken everything she thought mattered. The board didn't speak at first, but you could feel the power dynamics shifting beneath the surface. The way people looked at her had changed, not openly hostile, but no longer deferential. The doubt had arrived, and doubt spreads like fire in a dry field. Jared finally sat back, folding his hands. "I'll begin formal review. In the meantime, all of Mara's shares are restricted. She is to be recused from any board votes or capital decisions until a determination is made." Mara shot him a look. "This is a mistake." He didn't flinch. It's process." Richard tried again. "You're making a mess that won't be easy to undo." I turned toward him. "You thought the mess was burying me in the middle of a divorce announcement. You called that strategy?" He didn't answer. I looked back at Mara. Her hands were still, but her eyes were darting. Between Jared, Lorna, and me, she'd lost the room, but she hadn't lost enough yet to show it. I stood slowly. "That's all I needed to present. Unless anyone has further questions, I'll leave the board to review." No one said a word. I walked to the door. My shoes made no sound on the carpet, but the weight of what I'd left behind did. She came here to cut me out, and left with the structure frozen beneath her feet. Richard shot up from his seat like the ground beneath him had shifted. The charm he usually wore like a badge was gone. In its place, fury masked as indignation. "This is outrageous," he snapped, arms wide as if the volume alone would nullify the facts on the table, but no one responded, not immediately. The boardroom wasn't angry, it was stunned, and behind stunned comes something much colder: calculation. The chairman, Lorna, didn't raise her voice. She simply held up a hand. "If even half of this is real," she said, looking directly at Mara, "we're liable. Personally, legally, financially." Richard's mouth opened again, but this time no sound came. Mara's eyes flicked to him, then back to me. Her calm was gone. The carefully composed lines around her lips had hardened into something meaner. "You planned this," she said, every word biting, sharp. I didn't look away. Only the part where I refused to be erased. The rest of it, that was all her. The transfers, the vacation overlaps, the dismissive quotes in board meetings, the assumption that charm could replace charter. She had set the trap, and then stepped into it thinking she was the one holding the rope. The chairman turned to the others. "We need to vote now." Silence, then "I" from Scott, "I" from Denise, "I" from the director who once said I was too quiet for a COO, "I" from Lorna, one no from Richard, expected, Another hesitant no from Mara's longtime ally in strategy, his eyes on the floor, not her. Motion, 5-2, passed. Lorna didn't dramatize it. She just spoke, clean and clear. Effective immediately, Mara is suspended from her duties as CFO pending a full internal investigation. Her access will be restricted. Richard, as the potential subject of conflict of interest, your role as founder will also be placed under review. It hit like a detonation that didn't need a sound. Mara sat frozen, not crying, not speaking, just still, and that stillness wasn't strength. It was the collapse. Her fortress had been built on silent assumptions that no one would dare challenge her, that optics could override process, that charisma would protect her, and now, stripped of the narrative, she had no defense left, just exposure. Richard tried to recover. You were letting a personal conflict dictate company strategy. No, Lorna cut in, sharper now. We're protecting company integrity from internal exploitation. That word, exploitation, hung in the room like smoke. No one challenged it. I gathered my papers slowly, not rushed, deliberate. The dossier went back in the folder, still indexed, still bound. The tablet I'd used for the exhibit slid into my bag. No one spoke to me directly. They didn't need to. I wasn't the one on trial anymore. As I turned to leave, I saw Mara watching me, not with anger anymore, but with something closer to disbelief, like she still hadn't accepted that the narrative could be flipped so cleanly, so permanently. She had chosen this room to cut me down. Now it would be the last room where she held authority. I stepped into the hallway and left her behind. The house looked like it had been waiting for an apology all day. Every light was on, kitchen, hallway, even the bedroom dimmers humming low, like someone had tried to warm up a space that had gone cold too fast. Her suitcase stood upright by the door, pristine, untouched, not opened, not zipped in haste, a prop more than a plan. Mara was standing in the entryway when I stepped in. She hadn't changed out of her work clothes, jacket still on, heels still on, eyes tired in a way no makeup could soften. I didn't think you'd actually go through with it, she said quietly. Her voice didn't carry like it used to. It caught and broke at the edges. I didn't put my bag down, just nodded once. Neither did I, until you did it first. She blinked fast. I thought we were protecting the company. I thought it made sense. You thought it would be clean, I said, stepping around her toward the kitchen. You thought I'd roll over. She followed me, slow steps. It wasn't about erasing you. It was about survival. I opened the fridge, closed it again without taking anything. The silence in the kitchen felt tighter than the boardroom. At least there, I had a table between us. Here, it was just tile and history. She moved closer, reached for my arm like we hadn't been standing on opposite ends of a war 10 hours earlier. We can fix this, she said. We always could, even now. I looked at her hand on my sleeve, didn't shake it off, didn't touch it either. You built this version of us on the assumption that I'd stay silent, that you'd get to define the terms. She didn't answer, just looked down. Do you remember what you said the first time we pitched together? I asked. When they asked who wrote the original framework and you said, we did it together, she smiled faintly. Of course. I shook my head. But that wasn't true. You just said it because it sounded better, and I let you. That was the first time I gave you credit I should have kept. She opened her mouth, then closed it. I'll be staying elsewhere, I said, moving past her toward the stairs, tonight, and from now on. Where? Her voice cracked. Somewhere quiet. I walked up without waiting for a reply. In the bedroom, I took only the essentials: laptop, charger, a change of clothes, my external drive, left the ring on the dresser, not as a gesture, just as a matter of completion. When I came back down, she was still standing in the same place, arms crossed, 1,000 things in her eyes, none of them clear. You don't have to go tonight, she said. This isn't war. No, I said. War requires 2 people. This was you. I just responded. Her eyes flicked toward the suitcase. I was going to leave. I know, I said, but now you won't have to. I walked out. The door closed behind me with the kind of finality that doesn't echo. It just stays. She moved fast once she realized that the ground wasn't going to stop shaking on its own. By Tuesday morning, my attorney had received notice of an emergency motion filed through her legal team, an attempt to nullify the freeze by claiming it was retaliatory and outside the board's jurisdiction. A last-ditch narrative full of language like unfair treatment, personal vendetta, and irreparable harm to a female executive. It might have worked too if we hadn't already anticipated it. My counsel had everything prepped, not just documents, but order. The chronology mattered, the quiet consistency of her maneuvering, the steady erosion of co-founder equity, the rerouted funds. Most of it had nothing to do with gender. All of it had to do with governance. We submitted a 118-page counter motion within 24 hours, complete with full audit trails, transaction logs, archived board minutes, and one key clause from the Internal Code of Conduct. All material transfers of company assets must be declared to the board within 5 business days of initiation. Failure to comply will be treated as a breach of fiduciary responsibility. She had waited 7. That alone was enough. But it wasn't all. We also submitted screenshots of Slack messages where she'd referred to me as a formality and called Richard the real brain. She'd never imagined those words would end up in court, read aloud with timestamps attached. She especially hadn't imagined the judge would ask, after hearing them, if her emergency was simply an attempt to unwind her own strategy before it collapsed on her. The ruling came in Friday afternoon. Her motion was denied. The freeze remained in effect. Her equity, now held in trust, couldn't be accessed or leveraged until full resolution, which would take months, maybe longer, given the growing interest from regulatory compliance. She wasn't just paused, she was locked out of her own script. Later that same day, the board convened without her. A single item agenda. Vote on reinstating my operational authority. It passed 6-1. The one no abstained from comment. Lorna sent me a simple message afterward. Effective immediately, COO responsibilities revert to original structure. Welcome back. I sat in my new office, smaller but mine, as the email hit my inbox. The old badge wouldn't work anymore. I'd requested that on purpose. It wasn't about re-entry, it was about forward movement. At 8:42 p.m., my phone buzzed. Her name lit up the screen. I didn't pick up. A minute later, a text. Let's talk. Just us. I stared at the message for a long time, not out of indecision, out of memory. The last time she'd said just us was in the hallway after our seed round closed. We'd been celebrating. Exhausted and broke, but certain. She'd squeezed my hand and whispered it like a promise. It'll always be just us. Now it sounded like a salvage operation. I typed back, you said I was a nobody. Nobody would decline. And hit send. No follow-up came. Just the quiet hum of the room, the low murmur of traffic beyond the window, the soft notification ping that felt like a final note in a conversation that didn't need a reply. The victory wasn't loud, it wasn't even sweet. It was clean, and that was enough. The walls in my new office are bare, no plaques, no team photos, no commemorative gifts, just a desk, a bookshelf, and a chair that creaks when I lean back too far. The space is quiet in a way that feels intentional. No foot traffic outside the door, no one barging in mid-call, just the low hum of the heating vent and the occasional tapping of keys as I rebuild, task by task, in peace. It's not the office I started in, not the one we fought for, pitched in, grew into. That one had floor-to-ceiling glass and a view of downtown. This one has a parking lot, an espresso machine I paid for myself, and no one asking me to step aside for optics. And yet, this one feels more mine than any of the others ever did. The mail arrives late in the day. A slim envelope, no return address, but I know the handwriting, always slightly too neat, as if she practiced being legible just to avoid being misunderstood. Inside, the final court notice. Divorce finalized. No ceremony, no last hearing, just a line confirming dissolution and a case number I'll never memorize. Tucked behind it, a folded note. I was cruel, I was wrong, I miss us. No signature, no request, just that. I read it twice, then folded it back up and opened the drawer to my left. The dossier was there, sealed now, no more tabs, no more flags, just the weight of everything it proved, reduced to silence. I placed her note beside it, not as a keepsake, not out of nostalgia, just to keep things where they belonged. closed the drawer, sipped my coffee, and looked out the window. A bird hopped along the railing outside. Somewhere below, a delivery truck reversed with a beep, slow and steady. Ordinary sounds, the kind that go unnoticed when you're at war. I'd stopped explaining myself a while ago, to her, to the board, even to friends who didn't know how to ask what had really happened. They saw the aftermath, her departure, my return, the quiet PR statement about strategic transitions. But they didn't see the paper trail, the claws, the weeks of restraint, the choice to let silence hold the weight until it was time to drop it. And that's fine, because I didn't win by shouting. I didn't win by tearing her down in front of cameras or leaking her mistakes to the press. I won by writing the first clause and remembering it when she forgot.